Imagine returning from years of service, tired, broken, and ready to rebuild your life. But what awaits you back home is a betrayal so deep it shatters everything you thought you knew. 83 luxury condos standing on land that was never for sale. Your land, taken, without your consent. And the people who did it? They thought they could get away with it. But they didn't count on one thing: Mike Reynolds. A man with a past, a man who's fought for his country, and now he's about to fight for something far more personal: his grandfather's legacy, his home, and his right to make things right. The question is, will he get justice, or will the forces that took everything from him prove too powerful? The clock is ticking, and Mike's about to learn that some battles are fought not just with strength, but with the will to never back down. Mike Reynolds, a retired Navy SEAL, had always been a man of duty, of honor, of commitment to something greater than himself. After serving his country for over 2 decades, he returned to the small town that he once called home, ready to finally put down roots. He envisioned rebuilding his life, taking over the property left to him by his grandfather. That land, an inheritance that carried years of family memories, was the one thing that had remained constant during his years of service. But what he came home to shattered everything he thought he knew. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Yet upon his return, Mike was met with the most gut-wrenching sight. 83 luxury condos had been erected on his land. Not a single person had the decency to inform him. Not a single voice reached out to tell him that the place he had promised to preserve for his future had been sold out from under him. His heart sank. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just a case of land being stolen. It was a deep betrayal, an attack on his dignity and his family's legacy. It was the HOA, a group Mike had trusted, who had forged his signature to authorize the development. The betrayal ran so deep it almost felt like a personal attack. Mike, whose entire life had been about service, about defending what was right, now found himself in a fight to protect his own land. A fight against a powerful and corrupt HOA led by Eleanor Walsh. The more he uncovered, the more he realized just how deeply this web of lies was spun. It wasn't just his property at risk, it was his very sense of self. This first betrayal teaches a vital lesson. Trust is everything. Without it, even the strongest walls can crumble. And yet, it is in the moments of deep hurt that we find the resilience to rebuild, one brick at a time. Mike's journey was about more than reclaiming land. It was about finding the courage to fight for what was his, even when it seemed impossible. And in that fight, he would uncover much more than a corrupt HOA. Mike couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the house that once felt like home. The memories of his grandfather flooded his mind. The stories, the laughter, the long summers spent working the land together. This was supposed to be a place of peace, a haven after years of service. Now, it felt like a battlefield. His heart weighed heavy with the realization that someone had taken what was rightfully his. The emotional toll of this betrayal was suffocating. Mike's anger was justified, but it wasn't just about the land. It was about the violation of something sacred. His grandfather had entrusted him with that property. And now it had been stolen by people who didn't care about the history, the legacy, or the sacrifice that the land represented. Every square foot of that property held memories, not just of Mike, but of generations before him. And yet, here they were, building condos without even a second thought. The emotional toll also struck a deep chord in Mike's heart as he thought of the families now living on that land. It was easy to focus on the injustice done to him, but what about the people who had unwittingly bought into this scheme? They were innocent, but they too were caught in the crossfire. Mike's heart ached as he thought of the elderly couple who had moved into one of the units, only to have their dream home built on stolen land. And the young couple with their first child, about to bring a new life into the world, now facing uncertainty because of someone else's greed. But amidst the despair, Mike found a crucial lesson. Sometimes, the hardest part of justice isn't fighting the enemy. It's remembering that those who have been swept into the chaos through no fault of their own deserve compassion too. Mike's journey wasn't just about reclaiming his property. It was about ensuring that the families now living there had a chance at peace too. This was the emotional heart of his struggle. balancing his rightful anger with the need for empathy. In the darkest moments of this battle, Mike didn't stand alone. His old friends from the military, those who had fought alongside him in faraway lands, stood by his side. These men, now aging with him, were more than just comrades. They were brothers, bound by a loyalty forged in the heat of battle. They understood the depth of what Mike was facing, and they knew that this fight wasn't just about property. It was about honor. Mike learned, during this time, that loyalty was one of the few things that couldn't be stolen. The corrupt Walshes had taken everything else, but they could never take the loyalty of the people who truly cared about Mike. His army buddies rallied around him, providing support in ways that money couldn't buy. They helped Mike uncover evidence, provided moral support during tense meetings, and reminded him of the values that had kept him going throughout his life: integrity, fairness, and the pursuit of truth. One evening, as Mike stood before his lawyer, holding legal papers that seemed to weigh more than the world itself, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was one of his old comrades. "We've got your back, Mike. Always have, always will." In that moment, Mike realized that this fight wasn't just his, it was theirs too. They had faced unimaginable odds together, and now they would face the corrupt forces in their small town as a team. The lesson here is clear. True loyalty is invaluable. It's not about who stands beside you when things are easy. It's about who stands beside you when everything seems lost. Mike's loyalty to his friends and their loyalty to him gave him the strength to continue, no matter how difficult the journey ahead would be. As Mike began to dig deeper, he discovered that this wasn't just a simple case of land theft. It was much, much bigger. The HOA, under the leadership of Eleanor Walsh, had long been operating with impunity. They had worked their way into the very fabric of the town's leadership, manipulating rules, forging documents, and using their connections to secure their interests at any cost. The more Mike uncovered, the more it became clear. This wasn't a case of bad people. It was an entire system built on exploitation. The most chilling discovery came when Mike uncovered the true scale of the Walsh family's operation. They had bribed local officials, manipulated county records, and even created false surveys to legitimize their development. The corruption ran so deep that it seemed to reach every corner of the town's leadership. But what disturbed Mike more than anything was the realization that they had used the military service of men and women like him as a means to their own end. They knew that service members like Mike, deployed overseas and far from home, would never receive notices or be able to fight back. The emotional toll of this revelation was heavy on Mike. He had served his country to protect the ideals of freedom and justice, only to return home and find that the very system he had fought for had been twisted to allow greed and manipulation to thrive. It was a stark reminder that corruption could seep into every corner of society, even the places we trust the most. But in this darkness, Mike found a powerful lesson. Corruption can be defeated, but only if you're willing to fight for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Mike had always trusted his ex-wife, Catherine. They had shared a life together, built memories, and planned for a future. But when Catherine reappeared in the middle of this battle, Mike couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had been the one person who knew him inside and out, the one person he thought he could rely on, no matter what. But the truth would shatter that illusion. It turned out that Catherine, struggling with the aftermath of their divorce and facing financial ruin, had been secretly working with the Walshes. She had provided them with confidential information about Mike's property, information that allowed them to execute their fraudulent scheme. She had betrayed him for money, for a promise of a better life. When Mike confronted her, it was like a punch to the gut. The woman he once loved, the woman he had shared his life with, had sold him out for money. He couldn't believe it. He had always believed that some bonds were unbreakable. But Catherine's actions proved him wrong. This betrayal would leave deep scars on Mike's heart, but it also taught him a valuable lesson. Not everyone who smiles at you is on your side, and not every person who says they care truly has your best interests at heart. The emotional weight of Catherine's betrayal was undeniable. Yet, Mike knew he had to move forward. The lessons of loyalty, of standing strong in the face of adversity, would guide him in the battles yet to come. And perhaps most importantly, he learned that no matter how deeply someone might hurt you, the only way to truly win is to rise above it. The fight for justice wasn't easy. For Mike, it wasn't just about land or legal victories. It was about reclaiming something far more personal: his grandfather's legacy. As the battle with the HOA and the Walshes escalated, Mike found himself emotionally drained. Every document he uncovered, every fraudulent signature he exposed, only added to the weight on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his property, but for the very principles he had sworn to protect during his time in service. The legal battles were relentless, and at times, Mike felt like he was fighting against a tidal wave. The Walshes had deep connections. They had money, power, and influence in every corner of the town. The local government had been compromised. Lawyers representing the HOA were fierce and willing to bend the truth, making every legal step seem like an insurmountable hurdle. But Mike had something they didn't: the truth. The emotional toll was exhausting. Mike often found himself questioning if this battle was worth the cost. Was it worth the stress? Was it worth the sleepless nights? He thought about the toll it was taking on his health, the strain it was putting on his relationships, and the doubts that lingered in his mind. Could he ever truly win? But Mike found strength in moments of reflection, in thinking back to his days in the military. He had faced life and death situations where the odds were stacked against him, and yet he had come through. He realized that the pursuit of justice, even when it seemed endless, was worth every ounce of his effort. Justice wasn't just about winning in court. It was about standing firm in the face of adversity, no matter the cost. This emotional struggle taught him an important lesson. The fight for what's right is never easy, but it is always worth it. When you believe in something, when your heart knows the truth, you must keep pushing forward, even when it feels like the world is against you. As the legal battle unfolded, Mike watched as Sunset Shores, once a quiet community, became divided. The residents who had unwittingly purchased condos on his land were torn between loyalty to the community they had just settled into and the moral imperative to do the right thing. These were not bad people, but they had been swept up in the chaos caused by the Walshes. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know they were living on stolen land. The tension within the community was palpable. Some residents, feeling deceived, supported Mike's cause. Others, feeling the threat of losing their homes, sided with the Walshes. As Mike walked through Sunset Shores, he could see the fear in the eyes of the families who had nowhere to turn. They had been sold a dream, only to realize it was built on a lie. And now they were scared. They didn't know who to trust. Mike understood their fears. He couldn't help but empathize with them. They were caught in the crossfire, just as he had been. But this divided loyalty forced him to take a hard look at the situation. He could have easily torn the homes down, evicting the families who had no idea what had happened. But instead, Mike chose to take the moral high ground. He knew that the right solution wasn't about vengeance. It was about fairness. The community's divided loyalty revealed a powerful lesson. Loyalty to truth and justice must always come before loyalty to a system that's corrupt. Mike's willingness to help the residents, even when they had opposed him, spoke volumes about his character. In the end, his choice to offer them a fair deal wasn't just an act of generosity. It was the right thing to do. The battle against the Walshes was not only a personal struggle, it was a stand against the corrupt forces that had taken root in the town. The Walshes, with their wealth and influence, represented everything Mike had fought against during his time in service: the abuse of power, the exploitation of the vulnerable, and the disregard for the greater good. Mike's decision to stand against them was not just a fight for land. It was a fight for something much bigger. It was a fight for the future of Sunset Shores, for the families whose lives were being destroyed by the Walshes' greed, and for the values Mike held dear: honor, integrity, and the belief that no one, no matter how powerful, should be above the law. Throughout the battle, Mike encountered numerous obstacles. The legal system seemed rigged. The Walshes had manipulated records, bribed officials, and used every trick in the book to keep their empire intact. But Mike didn't give up. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that this fight was bigger than him. It was about challenging a system that had been corrupted by greed and power. And as Mike took on the Walshes, he also became a symbol for others. A symbol of resistance. A symbol of the everyman standing up against the powerful forces that had taken everything from him. The lesson here is clear. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come not from grand gestures, but from the simple act of standing up for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Mike's heroism wasn't about tearing things down. It was about rebuilding, about restoring honor and justice to a broken system. The weight of the decision Mike faced was unbearable. As he stood on the land he once thought of as his sanctuary, looking at the 83 condos that had been built there, he knew he had to make a choice. The future of the residents now rested in his hands. He could tear everything down, demolish the condos, and evict the families who had been sold a lie. But he knew that doing so would only cause more harm. These families didn't deserve to lose their homes. Mike had to make the hardest choice of his life, to fight for the land and his grandfather's legacy, or to fight for the families who had no idea they were living on stolen ground. The emotional toll of this decision weighed heavily on him. His anger toward the Walshes, his desire for justice, was at war with his compassion for the families now living in the condos. In the end, Mike chose to do what was right, not just for himself, but for the people caught in the middle of this mess. He made the decision to sell the land to the residents at a fair price, ensuring they could keep their homes and move forward with their lives. The lesson here is that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that define us. Mike's decision wasn't just about property. It was about doing the right thing, even when it came at a personal cost. The decision to act with compassion in the face of anger is one that resonates with everyone, especially when it feels like the world is pushing you to make a different choice. As the story neared its end, Mike found himself standing at a crossroads. The battle had been long, and the emotional scars ran deep. The Walshes were finally brought to justice, their corruption exposed for all to see. But in that moment, Mike realized that his journey wasn't just about tearing down the walls the Walshes had built. It was about rebuilding the community, restoring the trust that had been lost, and creating something new out of the ashes of betrayal. Mike's decision to sell the land to the residents wasn't just about financial compensation. It was about creating a future where the families who had been deceived could live in peace, a future where the legacy of Mike's grandfather could be honored by building something lasting, something meaningful. And as Mike walked through the community, now beginning to thrive under new leadership, he found a sense of peace. He had not only reclaimed what was his, but he had also helped others reclaim their dignity and their lives. The ultimate lesson of this journey is one of redemption. No matter how hard the road, no matter how many times you are knocked down, there is always a path forward. And sometimes the path to redemption is not just about recovering what was lost, but about helping others find their way. Mike had found peace, not through vengeance, but through compassion, community, and the courage to do the right thing.